Recording in progress.
Morning. All right, I'd like to call the Economic Development Authority meeting to order. With that, we'll have roll call.
All right, thank you, Mr. President. Commissioner Budiszewski.
Here.
Commissioner Cummings.
Here.
Commissioner Eidbo is absent. Commissioner Kamish.
Here.
Commissioner Kaiser.
Here.
Commissioner Oda-Sorosin.
Here.
And Commissioner Adams.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. We have the minutes before us from our last EDA meeting on March 19th. After you've reviewed, please let me know if there's a motion to approve those minutes. Tracy?
I will make a motion to approve those.
Thank you. And do we have a second? All right, thanks, Therese.
I can second that.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Thank you. With that, we have the 2023 annual report in front of us. John, I'll hand it over to you.
All right, thanks again, Mr. President. Here we go. I am going to minimize this. Hopefully we can see everything. As you know from what's in your staff reports, kind of fill the pages. So anything on the screen is going to maybe hide some things that you want to see. So once a year, we bring you a report on the EDA's activities in the prior year. We have to wait a few months because there's some data that we don't get until basically middle or end of March. So here we are. So one thing I'll point out on this map is that I didn't add the 3401, 3415 Douglas Drive purple magenta towards the bottom. You'll see there for the townhomes on Douglas Drive. I did not add that to the version that's in your packet. So this version on the screen is what we would put in the actual annual report. So the reason that we're kind of calling out the ones in magenta is because that's basically everything since the pandemic began. And also since we kind of ran out of single family lots to sell. So the character of the kind of properties the EDA is selling and the kind of development being built on them is becoming much more mixed. For example, in the last 2 years, we've had 2 single family homes, one of them with an ADU, and the other one, the one on Major, actually doesn't have an ADU, but the basement is set up to be converted to one later if they want. So that's new, and just for single family. And then the other 2 are a 4-unit building at 4741 Welcome, and the 8 townhomes at the northwest corner of 34th and Douglas. So I think it's kind of a new era beginning in 2021, and the map is trying to kind of separate the current era from the prior era when it was all single family homes. So this may be the last, for that reason I just stated, this may be the last year I put this chart in here because the last meaningful set of single family lot sales was in 2019. But just to explain it, the red line is the lot sale prices, not adjusted for inflation. So you can really see during the housing bubble in the mid-2000s, so almost 20 years ago, lot prices were actually higher in nominal terms. So they were way higher in inflation-adjusted terms than what our lots have been selling for since the housing bubble burst. The blue line represents the actual price that was paid for that home when it was completed and sold, the first sale. Some of these have since sold. Again, that's not reflected here. So, and then the green line at the top is the only one of these that's sort of adjusted for inflation. The green line is the homes built on the lots sold in that year, what the average estimated market value of those homes are today in the 2024 estimated market value. And so one way to picture this is if you were to have bought one of these homes, that's the blue line, and then still own it today, that's the green line. The gap between the blue and the green is roughly your equity, right? And as you can see in recent years, as you might expect, there's not much because when you buy a new house, you're paying a premium for new construction. But over time, the gap opens up. And that's not even counting the amount that people are paying down their mortgage. That's just because of the market dynamics in terms of what properties are worth over time. So, but again, after 2019, we're definitely in a different world now in terms of the properties that the EDA has to sell and the kind of development that we're seeing. And so I probably will not include this chart in future years because it really doesn't change much anymore from year to year. Now, this chart is another one where I made a change since your packets went out. You look at the far right-hand side, you see the 2023 bar is quite a bit taller than the one in your packet. That's because I forgot to include the 8 townhome units that are going to be built on one of the properties that we sold in 2023. And, but the red are showing properties that we acquired and demolished, and the green are showing units built as a result on lots that we sold. And you can really see the change in the market in that, especially during the housing bubble, we were buying and demolishing a lot of properties, kind of the worst of the worst. And then we started selling the lots into the recovery in the early 2010s. And then since then, we had the surplus property lots from the late 2010s. And that the revenue from that went into the Parks Fund, I think some of you might remember. And then 2021 and 2023, we're kind of getting down to selling the most difficult properties to sell and looking for some more creative types of housing products on those properties. Moving on to home improvement grants. As you know, the EDA uses mostly TIF money, but also some of its local EDA levy money to finance home improvement grants. Program usage went up in between 2022 and 2023, both in terms of the number of grants and the average size of the grant and the average size of the project that people were doing. None of that is surprising. The amount we spent on the grants in 2023 total went up. One thing I need to point out is that the share of the total spent on administration as a percentage of the total program cost increased from 14.6% of the total expenditures to 16.4%. Not a huge increase, but it definitely is something that we noticed. And the reason for that is Center for Energy and the Environment was spending way too much time on small grants, and the administration was 15% of whatever the grant was. And so they did this for all their city partners. They said, we have to go to a flat fee because whether the grant is for the maximum grant of $8,000 or the minimum grant of, say, $800, you know, it's costing us roughly the same to you know, process the application, do the income verification, and all the other stuff involved in administration. So that's the reason for that increase from 14.6 to 16.4%. If that is something that is of concern to you, as it is of the staff, one of the solutions would be to increase the minimum project size in the next contract, which would actually start in July 1st, 2025. We'll talk about that in the work program, from 4,000 to 5,000, which would move the minimum grant, because the grants are 20% of the project, up from $800 to $1,000. Even then, $500 admin, that's, you know, a lot for a $1,000 grant, but we think it's a fair thing to at least consider if that admin percentage is starting to bother any of the board members. I think I'll pause there. Any questions on this program from 2023? Okay. Redevelopment. Beyond EDA lots, we have our first new apartment building since the Kavanaugh, which was about 9 years ago now. This is at 5240 West Broadway. It's a 58-unit, 4-story building. I think you're all familiar with it. But for the benefit of the public, unit sizes range from 1-bedroom, 1-bath to 4-bedroom, 2-bath. And as you may have heard or read, the real shortage, the most significant shortage in the housing market, especially the rental housing market, is units for families. We have a lot of 1- and 2-bedroom homes, apartments that were built in the 1960s and 70s, but the need is for larger units. And so this will have some of these 4-bedroom, 2-bath units. All 58 units will be affordable at or below 60% of metro area median income. And roughly 3/4 of those would be considered workforce housing, and about 1/4 of them will be deeply affordable. That's usually below 30% of AMI, and they will include the provision of services. So here's what happened in 2023. EDA, you all approved the TIF agreement in April. The developer broke ground in June. By August, they had the foundation complete. That includes the basement parking garage, the structure anyway for it. And they had the framing and the roof complete in November. And they are rocking and rolling, and they expect to be opening sometime in June of this year. And they already have a waiting list for those 58 apartments of like 200 people or something like that. So there is a huge unmet need, and I think you all know that. A couple other properties, these are ones that we did sell in 2023. These are back to EDA properties. 482456 is that house with the ADU that Noberg Homes is building. They broke ground in January of 2024, and they expect to have it done this summer. And then the 8 townhomes in the 3400 block of Douglas. The permit was actually ready to issue in August, but they just didn't want to break ground that late in the season. And so they are expecting to start construction sometime this month, and they expect to have them done hopefully before winter. So other activities at the EDA funds, the facade grant program mostly so far has been funded with the county grant, and so we'll talk about that in the work program going forward. But the example photo there is B&R Auto Repair before and after pictures. We did continue with our contract with Sentenced to Service to do litter removal on our major commercial corridors, and that seems to be very successful in improving just the look of Crystal. It's not that expensive. We think we get a lot of bang for our buck for that. On the beautification side, a new thing in 2023 was we ripped out that giant sea of concrete on 36th Avenue, just west of 100, and with a lot of labor by the Parks crew and Public Works, and some EDA money to buy the materials, including fairly expensive soil. We had to completely replace the soil in that area. We did plant trees that over time they're disease-resistant elms, and they will grow to be very large shade trees. Elms grow pretty quickly too, so that's good. But and then the planter boxes and flowers, we continued to do that last year. So we had 3 ribbon cuttings in 2023, at least what I could recall: a Crystal Vision Clinic, Odom Medical Group, and Her Self Health. So we had 3 medical clinic type facilities open just in 2023. That was exciting. And one of them was 2 of them were new construction, and one of them was significant remodeling of an existing building. So, and we continue to provide partnership and a little bit of financial support with Elevate Hennepin, which reaches out to small businesses, startups, and focuses on different people. A lot of the new businesses in Crystal and a lot of the uptake of our vacant real estate, to the extent there was any, has been businesses owned by women, immigrants, and people of color. And so Elevate Hennepin is really focused on helping those folks connect with the technical expertise they need to start and grow their businesses and build wealth. And so, we're talking about accountants, we're talking about marketing people, and so forth. So we do provide $5,000 a year out of the EDA budget to Elevate Hennepin.
Excuse me, Chair.
Yes.
I have a question, comment. Also had the Crystal Women's Center last year. For ribbon cutting.
Sorry, I forgot about that one. So that's 4.
Yep, so we had 4. Pretty good. Thank you. That was it.
And then finally, the EDA does contribute, along with a smaller share from Public Works, to senior community services. The idea there is try to minimize issues with long grass complaints and other things that are of interest to both departments, but about two-thirds of the funding comes from the EDA budget for senior community services, and that's a blight prevention strategy. So, and then finally, we always have this map in the end to show you what we still own. The blue are the EDA properties. There aren't many left, and the ones we have left are really difficult to build on for a variety of reasons, but we'll talk about at least one of them or a couple of them actually, in the work program and other discussion later tonight. So with that is what we would propose for the annual report for 2023. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have on that. No action is required.
Yeah, Adam?
I just had one, or Tequila Town was another,
Oh, yeah.
council.
Yeah, great menu.
Other comments? John?
The fourplex that's being built on Welcome, so that's, is that part of the 2023 plan?
That lot we actually sold in 2021, so I
2021.
didn't have it in here, but I can give you an update on that if you like.
I would like an update on that.
So they did not meet their substantial completion deadline of March 31st, and I think there was concerns expressed by the EDA board, and staff didn't disagree that that was a concern. However, they have made substantial progress on the building in the last several months since you granted the extension. So we have or we soon will be sending them a default letter. That's a standard thing you have to do under the development agreement, to send them a letter giving them another 30 days to meet the deadline that they were supposed to meet on March 31st. And then if they haven't by then we would plan to at least inform the EDA of. So here's the remedy in a default. We have a right of reversion rights to the real estate. So the hammer that you have is to exercise our right of reverter and retake title to the property. I'm guessing we don't want to do that and then finish a building. Now, if progress stops and nothing happens for many months, that might be a different story, right? But if we're talking about they need another month or two and they're making progress, staff's opinion is that it's much better from our perspective, I mean the EDA collectively, not just staff, to not exercise our reverter. That is sort of a last resort. Because we don't want to be in the construction business. We want them to finish their building, and they've already had, a couple of extensions, or one extension plus an extra year on top, in the beginning than we normally give. So we want them to get it done, but as long as they're making progress, we would not advise you to press forward with that reverter. So, but they at least have another month. We're going to send that default letter, and then the 30 days starts ticking.
Well, I mean, it looks like, construction has stopped. I mean, nothing has changed, so, I mean, have they had any conversations with you? What's going on, or is it,
Oh, yes, that's a great question. I mean, you don't necessarily see everything on the outside, of course. Our building official was in there a week or two ago. And so, I mean, they are making progress, but it's fits and starts. So they'll get a bunch of work done and then it'll sit for a while, maybe because they're lining up the next subcontractor or something. And that actually is fairly normal in construction. You have a flurry of activity and then you need the next crew or something. And so that isn't concerning because the stoppage is, then there's a period of activity, stop, that kind of thing. So I guess that's why we're not as concerned. But if we get to the end of the 30 days and there's been no progress, then we have to start talking about other options.
yeah. I guess my concern is that, quite a few of the outside openings are not covered in some way, so I'm concerned of people getting into the building. I mean, God forbid,
No, that's a good point.
yeah, I mean, it's just, I would like to see the building a little more secure than the way it stands right now, so. I don't know, whatever that means, so.
Well, I know the building official told me they need to get it's garage doors because I think the windows are in.
The windows
It's
are
the
in, yes.
doors,
Garage
especially the
doors
garage
are
doors that are wide open.
Wide
so-
open, yeah.
Or at least one of them is.
And that means that they can get inside the building or get into the living space, and I just see that as a big problem, so. Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks, John, for that 2023 report. With that, we'll move into our 2024 work plan.
Thank you again. And so looking at what we're going to be doing this year, maybe this belongs in the annual report, but we want to kind of just show how we continue to add stuff. I think you saw this slide at the previous discussion in late February. Every year we've been trying to do a little more since the EDA directed staff several years ago to kind of try to focus on our commercial areas, not just residential. And so we've been trying to identify, do what we can with the funds and the staffing we have and try to do a little more each year. So this is a summary of these things. Most of these things are cumulative. We're continuing to do them. Some of them are one-off projects like the streetscape. But there are maintenance things with that streetscape that we'll talk about in a moment. So, large site redevelopment. So we continue to meet with developers. We continue to promote redevelopment opportunities. I've talked about this before, and it's not changing, but I guess it's a good problem to have, and that is we don't have any vacant land, and our retail building vacancy is actually quite low. It's less than 5% in Crystal, which is low by any standard for retail space. I mean, that's kind of what the apartment vacancy rate should be in a balanced market. Usually commercial vacancies are at a higher rate than residential. So, I mean, we just don't have a lot of financial pressures on the property owners of commercial buildings, even if they're kind of low value, low usage, to sell them for redevelopment. And we don't have vacant land. So the market forces are making it very challenging for developers to find a site that'll work for them in Crystal. Higher interest rates have broadly reduced apartment construction across the region and developer interest. You may have read about some of that in the newspaper. Single family seems to be doing really well, but apartments there are not a lot of new ones in the pipeline getting started right now. Now, interest rates seem to have stabilized, although they didn't today, but over the last several months they seem to have stabilized, and also they may start declining, and that would help the numbers work better for builders and developers. And also the Wells Fargo building at 7,056 sits on a 2.2 acre site. That would be a prime redevelopment site. So we might have a combination of things with a better interest rate environment combined with finally a good redevelopment site that's big enough to interest the developer to get something exciting to happen there. But regardless, we're going to continue to do our outreach. We'll continue to follow up with developers we talked to before. Our goal is always to put a deal together this year to get something going in 2025, because these deals take a while to put together. And we'll continue to seek funding to replace the West Broadway-Douglas Drive intersection, because that could be a catalyst for redevelopment in the southern part of our town center area. So I'll pause there and see if there are any questions or comments on the work program or work plan and what you'd like to see in it.
Yeah, so continue outreach to property owners and prepare development site flyers. Like, what does that mean?
On our website, we have basically flyers that promote development sites. So we talk to the property owners, hey, maybe your property could be redeveloped. And then if they're interested and they want us to do this, we'll prepare a flyer. It's usually got 2 pages, and it gets into a lot of detail, not like engineering level of detail, but it shows where the water and sewer lines are adjacent to the property, where the storm sewer is, that kind of stuff. We provide easements and things like that that a developer would need to know if they're going to look at this flyer and try to picture what they could build on it. So we try to put all that information on a 1 or 2 page flyer, and some property owners want us to put it on our website. Others don't want it on the website, but they're okay with us emailing it out or providing it directly to developers who might be interested in their site. It just kind of depends on what the property owner wants. So we continue to do that outreach and update those flyers as needed, and that's what that's about.
Got it. Thank you. David?
Just a comment. I'm really interested to see what happens with the Wells Fargo building, because I think you made a comment about how much space was there, and there's a ton of space, and I've also noticed there's just a lot of parking there that never was really used. You know, they have a big drive-through that was maybe too big, and just there's a lot of space there, so I'll be really interested to see what happens with that site. It's an exciting opportunity, I think, for the city. So.
And then also, what does it mean to put a development deal together?
Well, we're presuming that any kind of redevelopment would require tax increment financing. So if you, even if market rate property, in fact, the market rate property is more in need of tax increment financing because there's no other assistance available for it usually. And so if you recall though, from putting the TIF district together for the sand project, I mean, that basically, we started that 2 years before they broke ground on the building. Now, we can maybe tighten that up a bit because we don't have to wait for the low-income tax credits like the 5240 West Broadway project did. So maybe you can take close to a year off of that, but it still takes a long time from having a kind of a concept plan to actually getting something to break ground. Okay, thank you. So getting back to, we have another scattered site lot. As you know, the EDA purchased the tax forfeited lot at 6110 Lakeland. We actually got the deed in January, so it's technically a 2024 acquisition. We've surveyed the property, we've cleaned out the contents, and the asbestos assessment, which is the sampling and the testing of building materials in the structures. That is underway currently. I don't know if that's been completed yet. I think it was going to be this week sometime. So after that, if there is asbestos, assuming there will be, we'll do the abatement, hopefully by the end of this month, demolish end of May-ish, something like that, and then we can begin marketing the lot to builders. Our goal is to sell the lot and have construction start before winter begins, and they might have it done by next spring. So as far as the selling the lot, the marketing, as we always do, we would bring before the EDA, probably at your June 4th, I think is the date, meeting, the proposed request for proposal packet where we lay out the parameters. We think this would be very similar to 482456. This lot is also very large, and it would be a great lot for a two-family dwelling or a single family with an ADU. We really want to try to get as many units and as much economic density on a lot of this size as we can. And so that's kind of what staff is thinking, but we would come to you with a thorough proposal before we would actually start marketing the lot. So here's a property that it's been in every work plan for a few years. Through an accident of history, we have a very oddly configured property, and the flower shop actually has a driveway easement over this portion of our lot. So we've been trying to figure out basically a property swap. That would be the ideal thing here. Well, actually, the ideal thing would be for them to buy our property, and because our property is currently zoned commercial, so they could make something more useful of their commercial property. But they do not seem interested. So plan B would be to replat both properties, and then they would relinquish this easement, and then we would just give them this stuff up here next to their building, which is absolutely useless for a residential lot. And so on the right, as you see, is the kind of the concept of what the replat would look like. So we'd have a buildable lot here, and then we would have, the flower shop would take the part of our property that doesn't provide any value to the residential lot, and we would take this driveway easement, which doesn't provide any value to them because they've never had a driveway there, and I don't think under zoning they could even get a curb cut on a residential street anyway. So it's sort of a swap that should make sense for both parties, which is ideally what you do. But we do need a cooperative property owner to proceed. So I did email them again, and they actually replied that they acknowledge receipt of the same materials that we've been providing to them basically every year with this scenario. So hopefully they'll take a good look at it and we'll be able to move forward with this lot.
John?
So, what's the holdup? Is it the cost of, doing the retitling the two properties, or what's?
No, I think we would be prepared to just eat the cost of replatting because we're gonna benefit by having a single family lot to sell. We just need them to say they're interested in making this happen. Because right now, we have a lot we can't do anything with.
But just the raw land wouldn't really add much to their tax value, right? So is that, I'm not seeing how they would not do this, I guess. I mean, you know,
We agree.
yeah.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I don't know if they're just too busy doing other things with their business, or there could be a lot of reasons that we wouldn't know. But it's inexplicable to us, because there is value to be unlocked for both parties here.
Yeah.
And we would propose to them, and we have to formally propose this to you and have you agree to it, but we would propose that there's enough value in having a lot to sell that we should just basically absorb the cost of making this happen to clean this up, because it's in our best interest to do that. But even with that, they don't seem interested, so we'll try. I did get a response this year. They didn't even respond last year, so I'd say that's progress, and I'm keeping my fingers crossed.
They're aware that we would take care of all the, you know, the fee involved in terms of, they're aware of that, right?
Yep.
And the fact that they would end up with a new customer right next door, right?
I
Yeah,
haven't spelled that out for them, but
Okay.
I'm sure they figured it out, yes.
okay, thank you.
Tracy?
With the replatting though, that would no longer be construction and it would now become residential?
Yeah, we would have to rezone our new lot, so this lot would then be rezoned. This would stay commercial, and then we would rezone this new lot as R1.
Okay. And that new zone would have all the easements and all the minimal,
Lot size.
yeah, I mean, it looks like a really small lot.
It's shallow. It doesn't meet our minimum lot width, so we would have to do a variance and have to take that through the process. But that's, and probably a rear setback variance. But again, the neighbor to the rear is the flower shop, so.
And you don't think that having it with, is it too small to do as a small business lot?
Yeah, because there's no way to do a parking lot and other things. That's why the preferred outcome is they just buy our lot from us and they can expand their business then. And we've made it, we've suggested something that should be very favorable for that too, if they wanted to expand. So, again, we're just hoping that this is the year where they have a change of heart and decide that they want to make something happen there. We're certainly interested in helping make that happen.
So there's no cost to them with this replat scenario. Is there any incentive we could provide?
No, we haven't really thought of that. That's a good question. At some point, I don't know, we would already be giving them kind of the more valuable commercial land for free, and paying all all the costs, so I don't know what incentive would change their mind.
Do you have any idea how much the proposed lot or replatted lot would go for?
This lot, even this residential lot?
Yeah.
Even with its small size, I would guess it would be, in the $70,000 range.
And what would the cost of replatting be that we would eat?
Oh, maybe 10-ish,
Yeah.
maybe 15 tops.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Can we give them $5,000 and say, I don't know. It's just if there's a way for us to sell a piece of land, that sounds good, so.
That's a great point. They need a counter at some point. And we can't negotiate against ourselves, as the saying goes. But if they were to say something like that, we'd certainly bring that back to you and maybe have a closed session discussion at that point about what the deal points would be. Once they respond. Right now, we're just sort of waiting for them to have an interest in doing something.
Mm-hmm. Jim?
I think it might be worth a personal visit. Have a conversation with them.
I've talked to them on the phone, so they know. In the family, it's a family business, and I think they have other real estate elsewhere maybe. I get that sense. But I've talked to the person who actually runs the flower shop and is part of the family, so I've been told that they're my contact. And so, I haven't been out to the site recently. I did visit with them personally maybe a couple years ago, 2 to 3 years ago. So they know me. It's not like this email is coming out of the blue.
Okay, good.
Tracy?
So if we kept it as is, and with them having that easement there, even though they can't put a driveway there, what does that mean for if somebody were to buy that as the commercial property? Can they just not do anything on that easement area, or what does the easement do?
Well, the easement means that the flower shop has the right to build a driveway over to Veracruz in terms of property right.
But would it not, would that be a conforming, like, could they do that? Like, it would fit and everything?
Under zoning, I don't think so, because they don't actually have frontage on Veracruz.
So if they can't do it, and if we sold that as a commercial, is that just land, or is it just land that nothing can be done on? Because the new owner can't do anything with an easement there, right? And
Oh, I'm sorry, I misunderstood the question. If they were to combine these into a single commercial lot, then they would have frontage on both streets, and they could do a driveway over to Veracruz.
I meant if we kept it like it is right now and sold it as commercial, could it, is it too small to be a secondary commercial?
You could build a commercial building on here
And how would?
without doing the replat, but keeping our lot, so the left-hand aerial, keeping our lot like that.
Yeah.
And this is all hypothetical, but I suppose you wouldn't want to put your building on what they could claim as their driveway easement. And remember, we're not the ones acting here, so it's not our choice to roll the dice. We'd be selling this land that we own to somebody else to build something on. They're gonna have concerns about this easement sitting there, but I guess one workaround could be that they could put their own parking lot or driveway kind of over that easement, and then that way the flower shop could tie into that.
Right, that's kind of what I was wondering, if a new property could just make that their driveway. Could they make that a driveway? If some new property were to build there, could they use that as
Yes.
theirs?
And then, the easement just, you could build a driveway over it, and then the flower shop gets to use it,
Sure,
right?
yeah.
But it could be primarily a driveway / parking area for some kind of small commercial building. I don't know if the scenario would be the building kind of sits up in here, and then the driveway parking area is down here.
Is it currently for sale or not right now?
Which one, our
That-
property?
The lot that,
Yeah.
in the red, is that just sitting there and we own it and nothing's being done with it?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Have we tried to sell it with that stipulation that a driveway or parking lot would have?
Not in the open market. Their wall, their building is right here.
Yeah.
I guess that could be a plan C, is just put it out there and sell it as is and get out of it. I'd frankly be concerned about what kind of commercial use we'd get there.
Like, could it be like I don't know, like a drive-through coffee shop or something, or, like a smaller?
Yeah, it's really tight for that. For drive-throughs, you need a lot of space for those. We haven't really given a lot of thought to that, as you can tell. But they're fair questions. I guess that, I would call that option 3, I guess, not plan C. But option 3 would be, we could just, that could be part of the work plan this year, is we could just, if we don't get a response from the flower shop and start moving towards one of those 2 options, 1 and 2, we could come back to you and ask you to approve an RFP, or not an RFP, just buy this from us, please. See what we get.
Right, or just run something somehow to see what could actually work there, and, just see if that's even an option.
Jim?
So on that new lot, I guess on either lot, if a commercial person built a driveway on that driveway, the new commercial business would build that, wouldn't Rosebow have the option to tell them they can't use it? Because it's their easement, thank you.
I don't think, they don't own it, right? They just have a right to use it.
Correct. This is getting into legal territory, and we have not really dug into this, but I mean, it's an easement for a driveway, as long as the owner, and in that scenario, we should really look at the aerial, because this scenario is the replat scenario to create residential lot.
So,
It's really this scenario, so if you have a commercial building here and they build a, are you thinking, are you thinking of, it would be a house, but they'd have a driveway that go into their backyard?
yeah.
Okay.
I guess my thought is, if we have to go to the point where we're selling this on the open market, we could buy the easement from them. Maybe that's something that would give them more appetite, and then just get rid of that easement, which makes that more saleable and versatile, for that matter.
That is a great point. We have thought about that, but then we still have the issues with the property lines and encroachments and things. There's a shed that's slightly on our property we were gonna fix through the replat. But I mean, it's certainly a possibility we could explore
Yeah, we could maintain our setbacks, though,
for the new
for the new.
house.
Yeah, we have that ability. Yeah. So I don't know. It's, obviously, they're gonna be allowed to leave their building there, but we can emphasize to the purchaser that they will indeed have to maintain our setback on that side.
Thank you. Therese?
How long has Rosebow been there?
Oh, decades. New owner, they bought it, the current owner bought it maybe 10 years ago, something like that, 5 to 10 years ago. But the Rosebow shop has been there for, I mean, I don't know, 30, 40 years, I would
Yeah.
guess.
Okay,
Been a
thank
long
you.
time.
I think the original owners still live in the house directly west of it over here on Welcome.
They do.
I think they still live there. Mr. President, can I make a suggestion based, this is a great discussion. This is exactly why the kind of stuff we need to hear. So how about if, we can leave this slide the way it is, but see if we get a meaningful engagement with the owner of the flower shop in, say, the next month or two. And we can report back to you about whether that happens. Or if not, we can report back to you and say, there are a couple other options that came up in the work plan discussion. Do we want to try some of these other approaches, like just putting it out there for sale, condemning out the easement? There's two that came up tonight that seem like good options to explore.
Yeah, it seems like we have some energy around this piece of land, and yeah, so I'd be curious, like, how can we continue to engage with Rosebow? And I don't know, do we share, like, hey, the council is considering other options with this piece of land. We believe the best opportunity is for us to replat. That's probably most advantageous for them. So I think, yeah, like, hopefully they'll become willing participants, but if not, I think absolutely let's see what else we can do this year.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And you all have given me some great talking points with them to hopefully move them along.
Good.
Home improvement grants. So this is, every year I have this slide with the charts, updated charts based on the actuals from 2023. We've already talked about how it's administered by the Center for Energy and Environment, and later this year we'll bring the next contract to you, the one that starts in July 2025. And we, as part of that, we can talk about whether to increase the minimum project from 4,000 to 5,000. One thing I need to point out about that is one of the effects of it. Right now, real big ash tree removals, like if they need to bring in a crane or other, complicated ones, many of those are qualifying. They are more than $4,000, and that's kind of the only grant program we have right now to help people with removing these diseased ash trees. And it's, it's income qualified. They have to meet all the other requirements and everything else. We are going to try again for a relief grant that would provide assistance for private properties. So far, all the tree grants we've received have assisted the city with trees on public property. We're not allowed to use them on private property. But if we're successful finally in getting the relief grant, then that could maybe supplant the use of the home improvement grant for that purpose, because this is really supposed to be about fixing up houses. It's just because of the ash borer crisis, this is the only thing the tool we had available to help people of lower or moderate incomes. But if we don't get the relief grant, then increasing the minimum project for this program from 4 to 5,000 some of those tree projects are not going to be eligible anymore, beginning in 2025. Now, maybe by then, most of the ash trees will be gone anyway, I don't know. But that's something to keep in mind when thinking about where to set that project minimum. We'll talk about that later this year. Yeah, or we can talk about it now if you want, but we certainly would want to engage the board later this year on that. The charts on the right show basically how we pay for this program. And you can see that the green bars in the bottom chart, that's basically we're receiving more tax increment than we're spending. So that goes into the TIF fund balance. And then after the TIF district expires at the end of 2025, then we'll be spending that fund balance to continue the program as long as we can until we drain it. So that's what these two charts are showing. At this point, we think we'll be able to replace the TIF money that's funding this program with the new local housing aid from the state. However, the legislature is currently considering a maintenance of effort rule to add to that program. And it's not clear whether that would, basically what it says is you can't use this new state housing money to simply replace money you were already spending on a program. Now, we don't know yet if that's going to apply to funding sources that are not from the local levy, like TIF, which, I mean, once the district expires, it's gone. We don't get to keep collecting that money for this purpose. So, but by the end of the session, we should know whether or not we are going to be able to continue it using the local housing aid after 2029, or beginning in 2029. So we'll report back on that. Any questions on that before I move on? Storefront facade grants. If you recall, we got $25,000 for 3 specific districts, and we used that money. 2 of the projects were in 42nd Avenue, Area B, and one of them was Area C on 36th and Douglas. Didn't have a single project in Area A on Bass Lake Road, and that's largely because every single one of those storefronts except the Nakoma Shoe Block are all tenant businesses. None of them own the real estate, and that's a real challenge for programs like this. So anyway, we got a new grant for $25,000 that we can spend in 2024 and 2025. And you also budgeted $40,000 for other areas. So we have asked the county to approve program changes based on EDA discussion to eliminate windows, doors, and accessibility improvements from eligible improvements, because those aren't really facade things. Those serve other purposes. Increase the max landscaping share from 25% of the total project to 50%. And then if approved, then as we talked before, we would use our $40,000, it's already in our local budget, for projects that are outside of these 3 areas. And we have to come up with criteria, are the buildings old enough? We'd have to figure that out. But we would do that and relaunch the program with that expanded geographic eligibility. The goal would be to make it seamless to the applicants. So they don't need to know whether they're in an area eligible for county money, but we would need to know. So, if those changes to the county program guidelines are not approved by the county, and we hope to hear here soon, then we would come back to you and talk about other options.
So the county, they would change the program for like how we use it in Crystal, or at the county level?
Just great question, just our Crystal grant agreement with the county.
Okay.
I don't know of any other facade program or projects that they have been funding lately.
Okay.
That might be the only one.
I agree that windows and doors should be eliminated. Accessibility, I agree doesn't really fit in the facade kind of idea, but I actually think that is something I personally would be comfortable investing in. If someone wants to make, their sidewalk or, automatic door opening or something, I think that is something that would be beneficial to residents. So, I don't know, if there's an opportunity for us to keep that or something, I would like that personally. Jim?
I think, I was kind of thinking the same thing in the back of my mind, it's a matter of, okay, do we want to just replace windows and doors and make that part of the facade improvement? No. But could it be a certain percentage of that job? Yeah, I think that makes a little bit more sense. That would be a way of kind of making sure that more than just those two items are done. I don't know what that looks like, but it would certainly, I guess, still promote, the spirit of what we're trying to accomplish.
So one suggestion there, if majority of the board feels that way, in tonight's motion, you could include a change to say, set a 50% maximum for accessibility improvements, similar to what we're proposing for landscaping. Or a lower percentage, if you want. Accessibility improvements can become very expensive very quickly. So I think if you want to have a cap, want to allow them, but have a cap, so the whole project is an accessibility, I would say 50% is a fair number, and that also ensures that at least half of this stuff actually is facade type, visual improvements. But that is something you could include in the motion later on this item. If you want to give that direction to staff, we would happily make that change.
So, Jim, are you saying you are comfortable with windows and doors and accessibility up to 50%? Or are you saying just accessibility up to 50% and eliminate doors and windows?
I'm not saying eliminate doors and windows.
Okay.
And I don't know if 50% is, I don't know, that seemed high to me, but I'm really shooting from the hip on that one.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have anything to really base that on. So if they are going to be dealing with accessibility in windows, just because it's not all covered doesn't mean they're not going to do it, but yet they still can benefit from part of that project. So I don't know what makes sense. 50% makes sense to John and to everybody else here.
John?
I guess I'm okay with it.
Well, I'm thinking of the project across the street, the transmission shop, because they worked on the concrete, right?
Yep.
As well as the doors and the windows as well.
Yep.
So, I mean, I'm thinking that's the example that we have pretty much, been funding, in the past. And I also think of a Wine Thief and Jail Ale. I mean, obviously it's quite obvious what, the facade, storefront,
Yeah.
what that did for that building. So, I mean, I guess, I don't want it to be restrictive, to the point where we're only gonna do if it's above the door, the canopy, right, I guess, so. I would rather have this be somewhat more creative, especially if it's going to improve the overall appearance of the property. I think is what we're going for, right? Isn't that the goal? That's the goal. So, so I think more flexibility is better, so.
Jim?
Yeah, I think you made great points. That makes me a little bit more comfortable with 50%, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Adam, are you going to say something?
I was just gonna comment the shop across the street, the window different, there's varying degrees as to what is being replaced. It can either make no aesthetic difference, or it can really make an improvement to the facade of the property. So, without getting into too much, nitpicking over what is actually being replaced, perhaps a percentage of that, leave it eligible, but a percentage of it make more sense. That's a great example that, if you looked at the pictures that we had in the report, it was a big part of that facade improvement. But it could also have gone completely a different direction and still replaced the same items, but not had the same impact. So it's tricky.
So does the 50%, so if we think about doors, windows, and accessibility as a category, to Jim's point, I mean, 50% feels kind of arbitrary, but like, does that give us still the creativity, flexibility, and really help ensure that they're not just replacing all their doors and windows, there actually is some more facade, external things that, you know, it's a question, like I don't, or do we scrap the 50% and just leave the program as is? Tracy?
Do we get, I don't remember, do we get something when somebody applies for it? Do we get like an itemization or some sort of like a drawing or something of what they want to do?
Yes, there is an actual recordable, basically it's a forgivable loan. The grant is actually a forgivable loan that you have to authorize. And so we bring the project to you for approval, and specifically to approve that document so that we can proceed. But that includes a description of what they're proposing to do, what the costs are, and all of that. The challenge, because we had some people questioning this, the BNR project specifically, is once you write the guidelines, if someone submits something that meets the guidelines, but it doesn't look good, the EDA really doesn't have,
Recourse?
can't say no. I mean, I suppose you could, but it's not a good look, right? I mean, you know, for you to have this program, you put it out there and you promote it, and then, oh, it meets the guidelines, but it's not really what we're picturing. It's not a good thing for a government agency, so that would be the concern. That said, I think we've had 3 different projects, and they've all been kind of different things, right? You know, the mural, repainting of the Elysian Playhouse building, BNR auto repair, and then Wine Thief and Ale Jail. And in all 3 cases, I think Commissioner Adams pointed this out too, these businesses all did a lot more than just the stuff that was the facade project. So in all 3 cases, whether it was an incentive or not, who knows? But they certainly did, there was a lot more private money going into those properties than what our assistance was. So that part seems to work okay, at least based on experience so far. I think it would be reasonable if a majority is emerging that would like to see some kind of limit on windows, doors, and accessibility, but not eliminate them as eligible. I think the question would be, okay, if 50% is the number, is that 50% for windows and doors, or up to 50% for windows and doors, up to 50% for accessibility, up to 50% for landscaping? Or was it up to 50% for windows, doors, and landscaping? And then up to 50%, or excuse me, windows, doors, and accessibility, and then up to 50% for landscaping. So my suggestion would be to have the 50% cap for windows and doors, and a 50% cap on accessibility, and a 50% cap on landscaping. They don't have to add up to 100. It's just setting a, you know, your project has to be something other than any of these 3 things. You have to have something else. That's what that cap would mean.
Tracy?
In the guidelines, and maybe this isn't even possible, is there anything in there that says, like something to do with pending approval from the EDA or anything like that? I mean, do we have any?
It's a good question. We do say that in the application, that the EDA has to, or that, or somewhere in the guidelines, or the application, or both. We say that the EDA board, it's all subject to EDA board approval, but we have to have rationale, reasons, something, some kind of guidance. I mean, I'd love to be able to say, you know, whether we think it looks good, right, that's the criteria, but that's really risky, you know, to do that. So the guidelines are an attempt to try to get there in a way that we can rely on them to evaluate projects, to steer projects.
Jim?
Couple of random thoughts. When you talked about the percentage for each category, I liked that because it tells the applicant that we want to see more than just one thing happen. And then quickly after that thought, I was considering, okay, what problem are we trying to solve here? Do we have a problem?
Yeah.
Do we? I don't know that we do. Are there, I guess I'm talking to the council, are there any council members that have?
I think it was just a concern that, I think it was Forrest was concerned about he didn't want it all to go to just like replacing windows or something, and I agree with that. So I think that's where this kind of came from, mainly.
Okay.
John?
But all three examples that are shown as, they've done significant improvements to their properties, right? And so it's like, it's kind of an incentive-driven, proposal, it's something that, there's a lot of greater good that comes out of it. And so, I mean, I like the idea of like, the percentages, why not, right? And, sure, if they replace the doors and windows and stuff like that, it sounds like they're thinking bigger things for their property, and us being able to help with a small part of it is just a catalyst, I guess, for, the actually going forward with making the changes that they're gonna do. So, I don't really see any, I don't see any stinkers, in terms of like, moving this process forward. And I can understand Forrest is concerned for, like, well, we gotta be cautious here. But I think the examples that we have in front of us have shown that, this incentive program works, and why not, right? I mean, it keeps our city from looking grungy, I guess, I mean, it makes a difference. So I guess I'm not concerned about, anybody coming to us and saying that, oh, we want to have new sconces on the outside of our building or something like that. I guess I'm not really worried about that at all. I think that they have a bigger picture in mind, and we're just a small part of it, so.
Tracy?
But having the percentages isn't necessarily gonna limit them, but it would kind of give us a little bit of a, if we did get a business that wanted just sconces, it would give us at least a fail-safe to say, well, you can only use this much for that type of a thing, right? I mean, I kind of feel like it's more of a benefit to us as opposed to a hindrance to them.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's a way to steer them to say,
Right.
all right, well, you want to do $25,000 of window work. Well, or whatever it is. I mean, you pick a number, but the grant maxes out at this, and you can only use 50% of it for windows and doors. So you got to figure out something else for the rest of it that meets the qualification, meets the criteria. That maybe causes them to take another look at their flower beds or something that they weren't going to do anything with before, but now they sort of have to because of our grant criteria, if they want the grant. So that it's kind of about steering. It's helping them figure out what to do, and also it's a way of communicating to them what we're looking for with this program. So that's why I think the 50% cap on windows and doors, a 50% cap on accessibility improvements in terms of as a percentage of the eligible project, and a 50% cap on landscaping, that would all seem fair to me.
Is that an either or, windows and doors or accessibility, or they could use the whole 100% and 50 would be doors and windows and 50 would be accessibility?
Correct.
Okay.
But if you want to force something that really is definitely aesthetic, like landscaping or something not windows and doors, then the solution would be to say a 50% limit on windows, doors, and accessibility. Like those three things together couldn't be more than 50%.
Yeah.
And landscaping cannot be more than 50%. And therefore, because with the first way I said it, the whole project could be windows and doors and accessibility. There's no landscaping, nothing else, right? And I don't think the more I think about the discussion that we're having tonight, it seems to me that really the goal is to make sure there's something besides windows, doors, and accessibility.
Because if we had windows and doors, 50% accessibility, 50%, transmission place could have done the same thing they did. In
Yes.
theory. So if that's the thing we're trying to change in the future, then yes, we should probably group all of them. I think there's also maybe a philosophical question of should local government be funding private business, updates. And I think I maybe have considered that or brought that up during our last work session. Our money is just we don't have a lot of money to work with. And I think the bigger question for me is this the best way, or one of the best ways for us to use whatever dollars we have available? I'm not saying yes or no. I just think that's something that I do recall thinking about. Jim?
I think that philosophical question will come up and become more meaningful as we run out of TIF money. And I think we'll see probably a little bit more division within the council at that point, because now you're asking somebody else to directly pay for somebody else's stuff. And I think I run into some hesitation, well, a little bit more in hesitation, that's kind of putting it mildly, when it comes to that. So I don't think that's where we're at yet, but yeah, I think it's very real. I think that's something we're gonna have to talk about.
So, is this funded with TIF money today?
No,
Oh, my mistake.
Yeah, no, but I mean, that's the same concern could be expressed about the home improvement grants,
Sure.
if there isn't coming from TIF or some other source. So I think to that point, that is definitely a conversation we'll need to have as we learn more about how much more the state restricts the ability to use the local housing aid and where we're at financially in 3 or 4 years as the TIF balance gets spent down to zero. But in terms of this program, this is not funded by TIF. It's right out of your EDA levy.
Oh, it is.
Okay, so it's not a hedge
it's real.
account. Is it?
Well, it's both. Sorry, our local share, the 40,000 is from the EDA budget, and it is in the budget covered by the levy. The 25,000 that we got from the county late last year is sort of on top of that. So the idea is we'd use the 40,000 for projects out, well, they could be for in these areas or beyond these areas.
Okay, we're here.
John?
So I would agree with John. We just go 50% for the 3 categories across the board. Just do that, give it a shot. We can always change it, so.
Well, and the money has been allocated to this program for 2024 already.
Yes.
Obviously. So if we want to fundamentally shift how we think about this, that's a conversation for us to have during our budget season, correct?
Yes, in fact, it's on probably the last slide tonight.
Okay.
That very question, with a few others.
There's another slide, John?
We are almost done.
So I think with that, I'll just say out loud where I think we're landing, but correct me if I'm wrong. We want to group windows, doors, and accessibility as a category of up to 50%, landscaping up to 50%. I think that's it. Those are the 2 we want to kind of cap at 50%. Our rationale is that's encouraging a breadth of improvement and whatnot versus just replacing all of your windows or something like that. And this obviously is just for 2024. Is that fair? Does anyone disagree with that?
Sounds fair.
With that, also a note, and we'll get to it, like a more thorough conversation of how we want to view this, or how we want to leverage this program in years to come. Okay, I think we can move on from this slide.
Yeah.
So, beautification. A lot of this was talked about in the budget discussion as we prepared the 2024 budget. We now have real numbers on some of these things. Plant materials are roughly the same as last year. We have a new box and bowl watering contract of $5,000. We need to do that to keep these flower planter boxes and beds alive, the ones that don't have irrigation, which is all these portable or temporary ones. The local businesses, it was so hit and miss. A lot of them just weren't watering or not doing it regularly enough. And then new is a planter bed maintenance contract. Now, this is for those mulch beds that you see kind of along the streetscape on Bass Lake Road and around the Bass Lake Road 81 intersection, and then alongside 81, kind of on the outside, there are these surplus property bits that have these mulch beds in various locations. And right now, our parks maintenance crew, using a lot of their seasonals, has been trying to keep up with that, and they just haven't been able to. And the reality is, a lot of this stuff doesn't look that good, because you can only stretch that crew so thin, and they have parks to take care of too. And not being able, having a hard time hiring seasonals in recent years is also part of the challenge there. So this takes that load off of their shoulders for $10,000 a year. They will take care of all those mulch beds.
Real quick, John, Tracy?
Is the 36 and 100, is that considered a mulch bed, that new area there where they?
It is. I don't remember if it's one of the ones we listed in the contract. That one may not be, because it's so far removed from all the others, but I'm sorry, I don't remember for sure whether that's in or out. It really is just the volume of mulch beds in that northern part, the commercial part of the city mainly. There's just so many square feet that they have to try to maintain that it's just
What do
very
they
tight.
do? Do they just spray it?
They have to spray it, but then they have to physically go out and pull the weeds too, because you can't spray often enough, which isn't good for the environment either, right? So they have to physically weed them and tidy them up and put down fresh mulch, and, over the winter, the fabric or whatever underneath it gets pulled up, and you gotta push everything back down. It's actually a lot of work to maintain those. There's a reason that the default setting for public right-of-way is grass, because once it's established, you just mow it. It's really low maintenance, even if it's terrible for the environment. So mulch beds just take a lot more work, and that's part of it. But I'll get back to you on that to answer the question about the 36th one.
And also, John, excuse me, if you could also check in, do we water that on 36? We water that mulch bed.
Yeah, our parks crew is gonna be watering it, and that may be the reason we didn't include it in the contract, is they're gonna have to go there and water those trees for the first few years. But once those elms and lilies are established, they won't need watering going forward.
Yeah.
But that's a good point. I'll confirm, but I'm pretty sure that is not in the mulch bed maintenance contract, because we're gonna go out there anyway and water those ourselves. I think the parks crew has a sense of ownership over that, because that's their project. The EDA paid for the materials, but I mean, they built that, right? And so I think there's a little more love for that, and I think they'll want to take care of it. And then litter cleanup. Estimated cost is going to be up a bit this year because we started a month early, because we didn't really have much of a winter. So we started right at the beginning of March instead of the beginning of April. And I don't know if any of you have noticed, but I've noticed that the quantity of litter in Crystal, especially on Bass Lake Road, there are spots that are always trouble spots, but just the general amount of litter that's scattered around that area is a lot better than in our peer communities. I think it's because we do this. So.
On the bed maintenance contract, I know you said this, but so this is new this year. What have we done in the past?
Our parks maintenance crew has tried to work it into their own work that they do.
And it's okay. I mean, honestly, I'm not shocked, but I don't love the idea of having to contract watering and bed maintenance. And as I think, like, I have a desire or passion for us to continue to beautify, add more planters, I mean, all these things. If we have to continue to contract just to upkeep these things, I think, one, it's important for us to acknowledge all this stuff costs money long-term. It's not just a one-time, deal to put a planter in. But if we want to keep going this route, I don't know, does that warrant a conversation of how, our Parks and Rec or that group is staffed? And I don't know, I don't love seeing these contracts. I assume we're doing it because we have to, but maybe it warrants a larger conversation. Adam?
Related to this, so as John mentioned, the seasonal staff, at one time we had 8 seasonal staff. We are now at like 6 at the most, 3. I mean, it's been really difficult the last several years to get the seasonal staff. When you're paying a full-time maintenance worker position, you know, $35 an hour to go water and maintain, you know, garden beds, that's not the best use of our, because we have other things for that staff to do as well. So some of it is actually more economical, but some of the things that staff has been talking about, and especially after the last vision session discussion about the beautification, one of the things that we have also, so the maintenance costs is always something that our previous, Mark Ray, the previous work director, was always very focused on. One of the issues is like boulevard trees. We eliminate those. There are other impacts on infrastructure that they can have, but which has to be considered. But again, for the bang for the buck for a city that we have, you know, we've limited opportunities to beautify things, but we don't have a shortage of, or we don't have a abundance of trees. So that's something that staff has been looking at, is there may be, we may need to change that, but meaning allowing boulevard trees to be planted. We can't rely on the property owners to necessarily do it. It has to be done correctly, and maintenance costs have to be considered. But that's going to be part of the conversation for our budget this year, is that different approach. Because I think that's a kind of low-hanging fruit for beautification, as well as the forestry, urban canopy improvements. But that's kind of along the same lines. There's going to be increased costs in any of those types of activities. The $10,000 sounds like a lot for bed, you know, flower bed maintenance, mulch bed maintenance. But when you spread that out over the amount of work done over the summer, it's, I don't want to say it's not that much, but it's still cheaper than hiring more full-time maintenance worker staff. Mm-hmm. And the seasonal staff has just been really challenging. So it's kind of one of the questions of, if we want to do that, that's going to be the cost. Mm-hmm. So as we get into the regular budget, that will be part of the conversation as to what other similar beautification projects of the city or does the council want.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Comment.
I will say this, the bowls look great, the flower bowls, the picture in the middle, and maybe I'm just longing for spring, but they look great. I have one question, if I can jump back a while ago. What, John, is the timeline for the roundabout at Douglas and Broadway there?
So we are awaiting word on whether it got funded in this round. It's every 2 years, so we just did another application last year. We should know by middle of this year-ish whether or not we got the regional solicitation funding award. And I think I can say that we have not had a response from the property owner that they're interested. So that we're focused now on just, can we put the funding together for the road project and then deal with the right-of-way needs later.
Okay, so. Thank you.
So, new activity, traffic signal cabinet wraps. We talked about this a lot, so I know it's late. I'll try to keep this short. Basically, everything's on, as we talked about before, we're on schedule. Goal is to get these installed before Frolics. We think we can make that happen based on the talk with the selected vendor. But I think on the artist selection idea, trying to introduce any kind of financial compensation actually makes things a lot more complicated. Like either it's just a token anyway, or it's going to be very expensive. So our thought at a staff level is, let's just go ahead and put it out there and do like a recognition plaque. This is Adam's idea, so I got to give credit where credit's due. Like the design would have, the template would have like a plaque that they would put their information on, kind of a standardized plaque to say, you know, artwork created by so-and-so, and they would still basically sign it over to us that we can use it for this purpose, for this public purpose. But we wouldn't actually provide compensation, because then it's a whole different level of things. And maybe there are artists who just want to get their work out there, or even just local people who aren't professional artists, but actually have enough talent that they can come up with something really cool that you all would like. It's just hard to know until we try. So the one change since we last talked is we're planning to just solicit proposals with no compensation other than the recognition and that plaque and other types of promotion that we can do as part of rolling this out.
How do we plan to solicit?
Haven't really got that far into the details yet. I mean, we know there are 2 muralists that have done work in Crystal and Robbinsdale, and they both live in Crystal and Robbinsdale respectively. And we, so we have their contact info. We'd probably start with them.
Okay.
See if they're interested in doing something for their community or adjacent community. And yeah, I mean, I'm sure there are artists, social media groups and others. We
Sure.
put it out there any way we could.
So we're not just going to post on Facebook?
No.
Okay, good.
No, this will definitely be a targeted outreach to people who would be, real artists or some
Yeah.
real talent, yeah.
Yeah, and I'd be curious how we could engage, youth, younger folks, at the schools if there's some kind of programming. Also, there's a Juxtaposition Arts in North Minneapolis, kind of a youth focus. They actually did a project for the light rail.
They did the 3D model of the Bass Lake Road interchange.
Yeah.
It's right out in the back hall here. That
Yeah,
was their
so
work.
so
Yep.
how do we tap into kind of local organizations like that? I think that'd be great. Because I worry about this May, June solicitation period to get 10 legitimate and I wouldn't want this to be stalled because it takes 6 months to get, you know what I mean? So whatever we can do to be proactive.
Well, and if there was one design or 2 designs you really like, you can use them on multiple boxes too. Like that's part of it, is like you may find one design that just jumps out, like this is the one. You can put it in all 10 if you want. The other idea that's in my head, we haven't put it down on paper yet, is North Hennepin Technical College or North Hennepin, I don't remember which one. Their students designed the New Hope streetlight banners.
That was Hennepin Tech. It was, my daughter actually is in that program. It was the graphic design program.
At Hennepin Tech or?
Hennepin Tech,
Okay,
yeah,
thank you.
yeah.
Did you say your daughter can design some things for us?
Yeah, they can totally.
I mean, that's great, yeah.
So,
John, were you going to say something?
Well, I was gonna say, yeah, we do have art schools in the area. I was thinking of the Purpich School down in Golden Valley is one. I don't know if I can't think of the name of the school that's on Adair. I don't know if they're art-based or not. But they-
Fair.
Fair School, yeah, Fair School, I think. But anyways, there are schools that are specifically, there's one in Eden Prairie, I think it's called PIM. So there's schools, if you're looking for schools to do the design is great, so. But yeah, we just have to ask, I guess, right?
Therese, were you going to say something?
Oh, no, I think that's a great idea. I was thinking Purpich or Fair.
Yeah,
Reach out. Fair is middle school. I mean, I think.
which is fine,
Great, yeah.
right? You know,
4th through 8th grade, I think,
Yeah.
on Adair, the school.
just,
I've met with the principal there on the Historical Society stuff, and he's really eager to get involved in this specific community.
Yep.
So,
Great. I also think I like that we're not leading with compensation. We can also, once these things actually get wrapped, maybe the council goes out and we have a little ribbon cutting at each one, with whoever did it, and make it kind of a public kind of deal and celebrate the folks that whose art's displayed. So I think there's a lot of creative things we could do. John?
yeah, let's face it, Tasha, you don't want to pay anybody.
yeah, artists shouldn't be paid at all, nah. And musicians, don't pay them either.
and then I'm not gonna read through this whole slide, it's in your packet. None of this stuff is that different from what we've been doing. We just keep trying to do more of it and focusing on what works and what doesn't. So I just wanted to encourage all of you as individuals. You can do something we can't. As individuals, council members, you can use your own social media to promote local businesses that you like or you want to get the word out about. We do things in a certain way because it falls within our guidelines, like the small business brain teasers. It's not advertising, it's a game. That's how we do that, right? So we have to be very careful, though, that we're not using our public platform as advertising. So Whereas as individuals, you have a lot more freedom. So I want to encourage all of you, if there are local businesses that you're passionate about and you really appreciate having here and you want to help support them, you can do that on your own. You don't need to have the city do it, and you have a lot more latitude. Okay.
Question on the business networking stuff. At some point, there was conversation of something 2.0, New Hope, Crystal, something. I mean, is that still a thing, or?
That is the New Hope Crystal Business Networking Group. That basically New Hope had a group like this that didn't have a 501c3 and they didn't actually have a formal board. It's just the city set up these meetings, and that was one of our options when Crystal Business Association kind of shut down. And New Hope said, sure, more the merrier. And so they renamed it the New Hope / Crystal Business Networking Group. And we go to those meetings and we promote things that are going on, not just business related, but like at the meeting, I'll be going to one tomorrow. I'm going to talk about the police department open house, for example, and the Arbor Day planning at Skyway Park on May 1st. So we talk about community events, make them all aware of that. Tell them what's going on in the community. Exactly the same stuff we did at Crystal Business Association without the overhead of an organization and a 501c3.
Got it. Are there Crystal folks that go there?
Yes, several came over from what was Crystal Business Association. And I mean, as you know, our cities, there's so much cross-pollination that a lot of the businesses, you know, they may operate New Hope, but they serve everybody and vice versa. So it really does seem to have fully fulfilled whatever the mission, whatever our role in CBA was. You know, it was the other stuff that CBA was trying to do that didn't really take off.
Got it. Thanks.
Okay, this is only if you want to talk about it, but just a recap of the budget for 2024 and the financial summary. It's in your packet if you have questions about any of it. It's getting late, I know, but it's all here if you want me to answer specific questions.
So, John, just a question. So, Crystal's estimated market value, 2.8 billion. So that means if someone were to buy Crystal, that's how much we're worth?
If someone were to buy all the private real estate.
Private real estate, okay.
Yes.
Got it.
A little under $3 billion. Okay. So this is that kind of that last slide I was talking about as we prepare the 2025-2026 budget. First bullet, do we continue the facade grants after 2024 or focus on other things? And we can continue to ask the county to help fund our program, but at some point they're probably going to want to fund other things. So do you want to continue to use some of our local EDA HRA levy for that purpose after we spend what we've already budgeted for this year? So that's a question. We can talk about it tonight, we can talk about it later, but that's something that we clearly need to talk about because there seems to be a variation of opinions on that, and there's no lack of other things that we could be focusing on. We have a lot of public infrastructure out there that's old and tired, and that's the second bullet. So we could try to identify additional locations for installation of permanent beautification and landscaping. More of the 36th Avenue median variety than of the $500,000 Bass Lake Road streetscape variety. So we're not talking about putting in irrigation and power. We're not talking about, something like that. We're talking about what can we do, spot locations, low cost, where do we have the space, where does it have an impact, and how can we do this where we don't have to have an irrigation system forever, right? Thinking about those long-term maintenance costs. So that's something else that we could work on this year and to know more about as we get into 2025. But we need to start budgeting for it now to figure out how much do you want to spend on this. So that's something to consider. Do we continue to work on a possible entry monument at 36th and 100, including some of the design options and refinements that you talked about when we talked about this a couple months ago? Or is that, since that's kind of the only place in Crystal where we could put something like that, for the reasons I discussed in that presentation, since we'd only be doing one, do we maybe not do that right now? And see what we end up doing with the Bassler Road interchange if the Blue Line project happens, because that will be a gateway to the city, and we may get some ideas out of that and try to replicate that elsewhere. So that's something to think about. And then, now that Crystal Sweet Living has completed their building just north of the right-hand red box, that's their building, and they did not buy our vacant lot just south of their property, and we have another vacant lot back here across this unimproved Edgewood right-of-way. We have multiple private owners besides us. We can just let this land sit, knowing that we're gonna own these two lots amongst all these other lands until a developer comes knocking on our door. That could be 20 years, if ever, but there's nothing wrong with that. The land just kind of sits there and it's kind of turned into a forest, although it's mostly junk trees, but you know, that's what happens when land just gets overgrown. It's kind of wild, and that has an appeal, right? So there's that. But if we want to try to make something happen here, staff opinion is that we need to be the catalyst. And the main uncertainty is, if you were to try to develop something in this area, is it even feasible? We're pretty sure it is. The right-of-way is mostly there. The utilities, there's water now up to Sweet Living. That was part of what they had to put in. There's a water main up to here. You know, could you extend Edgewood Avenue, put a cul-de-sac here? If you did that, you could get probably 12 lots in there, if all these property owners agreed to sell off the vacant land along the Edgewood right-of-way. So 3 of those 12 lots would be the EDA, or 4, excuse me, 1, 2, 3, 4, because there'd be one on Douglas here. So we could get like maybe 12 single-family lots, okay? Does that generate enough lot sale revenue to pay to extend that street? Or, if the property were consolidated, could it be a little townhome development back there? That could be very attractive. So, I mean, there isn't any one private owner that owns enough land. Like, we're the biggest landowner in this area. Not by much, but we are. Somebody needs to do a feasibility study. Because every time someone has approached us about this land, or we've suggested it to developers, nobody wants to spend that initial money to find out what would it actually take to make this developable. So that's something we could talk about. We don't have money in the 2024 budget. This would be something we would talk about for 2025. So I'm just putting that out there, because I remember that map at the end of the annual report with the EDA lots. The ones we have left are kind of the challenging ones. Well, these are some of this is some of the challenges that we have to deal with this land.
Therese?
Couple questions. I'm sure we know who owns these other lots here. Is that just would that be Florida? So the lot behind that house, is that the person that owns that lot?
Great question. Only one of them is. One of these 2 lots is owned by the homeowner in Florida. This one is still just one big lot off of Florida. So this owner would have to decide to sell off the back part of their backyard, the Edgewood part. The others are all well, they're not absentee owners. Like the same person who owns this house and is now renting it out, they don't live there anymore, owns these 2 lots. This is owned by a investor or speculator from Robbinsdale. And then I think this one is owned by somebody out in western Hennepin County or Wright County or someplace, like in the area, but not anywhere near local.
Were these people thinking at some point Edgewood would go through there so they could access this land, or?
So another good question. I don't know all the history here, but when these lots were created, the street was platted. But I think the physical challenge of building the street and the run-up in land values is a more recent phenomenon. So when this stuff was platted decades ago, you know, lots weren't that expensive, and if lots aren't expensive enough, it doesn't justify the cost of putting the infrastructure, but that dynamic may have changed now. That's kind of what the feasibility would look at is, you know, can you make enough money developing this, consolidating the property and, you know, and to pay for the infrastructure to have this area developed for something.
Jim?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a challenging area. I've walked it before. There's some change in elevation still. I know a lot of that was part of the other development, but yeah, when you walk through there, it becomes very apparent that there's going to be some work that needs to be done. So, yeah, I would be real curious to see what a feasibility study would look like with that topography.
Therese?
Can you ballpark for us what a feasibility study would cost? Just a rough idea?
No, I mean, a couple tens of thousands of dollars. It depends how much detail they go to on the engineering, and how many different options we want them to look at.
Okay,
I mean, that would be, I'm really guessing there, I'm sorry.
that's okay, I asked for a guess. Thank you.
John?
And then you said, you thought about 12 single-family homes would be back there. What was your thoughts in terms of, like, if you had like a really, like a nice townhome environment back there, would it be similar to the one that's like off of Douglas, about that size, about 40 or 50 townhomes, or?
No, it would not be anywhere near that size. It would be, by Doug, you mean Adair and 47th? 40 or
No,
50?
no, I'm thinking of, yeah, I guess, yeah.
Yeah,
47.
Parkside Acres behind the
Right,
community
yeah.
center.
Right,
Yeah, it would be much smaller than that. Well, you can kind of see here, this is the 8-unit development that we just approved and is going to break ground here this month on the EDA sites there. This is one that was developed about 30 years ago, also 8 units on about an acre-ish. So yeah, with townhome densities, you might get 16, 20 maybe? Again, real rough guess. The single-family development is pretty straightforward. You just extend the street up here, put the cul-de-sac here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 lots. I mean, the layout is easy to figure out in terms of, at this level. Once you get into topography and running utilities and how do you deal with stormwater and all these, then it maybe changes, but yeah. I think 12 lots would be the top end for how many lots you could get there. And those would be really valuable lots. I mean, you know, 80,000-ish in today's market. I mean, there's a huge demand. Like, people are looking to build $500,000 homes in Crystal if they can find a lot.
Therese?
I just recall when there was a business that was interested in that property before Sweet Living came in, and they weren't going to tear down the office building that was there. They were going to put in a residential treatment center, I think, if I
Right.
recall correctly. And there was a very vocal, unhappy neighborhood group that I had thought lived on, but maybe Florida. Just throwing it out there. There might be unhappy neighbors with any development back there.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think it's highly likely. Any development of that area, you're cutting down our woods. If you remember, New Hope had that city-owned land. The whole thing was city-owned north of the tracks, west of Louisiana, just west of Iron Horse Park. And they'd said for decades, we're going to develop this someday. And if you look at the aerial photos from 40 years ago, it was farmland or grass. It wasn't forested at all. And again, over 40 years, you know, in this climate we have here in Minnesota, you get trees. Most of them are box elders and, you know, not necessarily nice trees, but it looks like a forest. And people think it's been there for hundreds of years. In reality, it's been there for half a century at most. And so this area, I think, has a little more old growth to it, but it's still Like this Crystal was mostly farmland until if you look at the earliest aerial photos. I mean, but that won't matter, I guess is my point, because there was a similar outcry about that New Hope project. And so, yeah, that is a kind of a political downside. That's why I mentioned the option is just let it sit. It's okay that we own these 2 lots and we just wait and see what happens.
Well, it's interesting to think it might be developed, but I think we have to be the one driving the bus, right? It's not gonna happen without the city getting very involved, trying to market it or, right?
Exactly. I think that the feasibility study would be necessary to get anyone interested in doing anything with this place. So not doing the feasibility study is fine because it just means status quo. We'll just let the land sit there and you can always revisit it later. But if you want to try to get, at least get some interest, we need to answer those unknowns about what's it gonna take. We have no idea at this point, other than what I sketched out very loosely.
Tracy?
So have we ever reached out to any of those other property owners to see if they'd ever be interested in selling?
Some of them, yes. Others, we have no way to reach out to them, but other than just sending them a letter to their official address on the property records, which we would definitely do. I should have mentioned that. Part of the feasibility study would be to let them know, we're gonna do this study, and here, once we figure out which options, single family, townhomes. You could do a split option where you do extend Edgewood just a little bit up on the top of the hill and do single family up there, and then maybe use our Douglas lot as a driveway for townhomes back here. I mean, it doesn't have to be all one or the other. But we would lay out kind of the rough ideas, something like this, and say, these are some things we want to explore, and just to let them know that we're going to be studying this, and we'll share the results with you. And so it shouldn't be threatening to them, but we would reach out to them in that way.
Would we want to share it with them? Only because if they find out, oh yeah, this can be done, would it not drive up what they would ask for those lots?
Well, we could accept everything we do as public. So presumption is always to, I guess it depends how savvy they are, but most property owners are savvy enough to. Well, let me back up. Our goal is not necessarily to be the developer. Our goal is to see if there's a way in which our land can be sold as part of something bigger, and we don't have to deal with it anymore, and we get something useful for the community, and frankly, we need housing. Everyone needs housing. So that's part of it. Our goal would not be for us to go in and replat everything and act as a land developer. We would try to find out if it's feasible and see if anyone else wants to do it. So we would not be buying the land from these people.
And does the city own that stretch where the north, okay.
Yeah, that's platted right of way. Yep.
And it's platted for, as you can see the lots, it's platted. There's potential development of all of those. The other thing that the feasibility study would show us is where is that threshold, as John said. We may not need all the lots. There's 12 max single-family lots, but can it be done with 6? It's so some of that, if not all of the adjacent property owners are interested in selling, or, again, there's the whole political aspect of the neighborhood, but maybe they don't want to have their backyard. They're not opposed to the development, but they don't want to shrink their, they want the privacy of their larger lot. So that's all that type of information is what would be determined, or at least, tried to research as part of the feasibility.
Well, there could be like property owners on Florida that think they own the lot behind them, don't want anything built there, but in reality don't own it.
I'm fairly certain, just because we've had interactions with several of the property owners in Florida on other issues, that they know that they don't own that land. The only one I know that we have Somehow this owner has communicated to the city that absolutely not is he interested in selling. Well, right now, right? I mean,
Yeah.
You know, things change, and ownership changes. And then we also know that, yeah, they know that their land doesn't include this. This person definitely knows their land does not include the EDA lot. This one, I think it's this one, actually does own the lot. And this person may kind of use this lot, but they clearly don't own it. So I'm not concerned about that. Again, perception can be reality though, where people, you know, they treat that as their land, and they feel it's their land, and they don't ask too many questions about it until suddenly something might start happening, and then they can get upset because it's not what they've kind of come to assume.
That was my point,
Yeah.
so.
I'm assuming there's nothing north of that, the next crossroad that.
So, this lot here would have been a great candidate, there used to be a blighted house on it, to put the cul-de-sac up here and get 4 lots, 2 on Florida and 2 here, if the blighted house were torn down. And I don't remember why we didn't buy it, it was a foreclosed house, vacant and blighted, and a private party bought it and built a very expensive house that right in the middle of the lot. So there's not room to do, like the cul-de-sac would end here. Because just north of this, you're getting into the floodplain of Bassett Creek.
Okay, that's what I
Yeah,
was wondering.
so, yeah, this would be the northerly extent of the cul-de-sac, it'd be right about here. There'd be no reason to go further. My final thought on this is, there's a lot here, not expecting us to solve it tonight. This is really great feedback, I really appreciate it, and I'm sure Adam does too. But I'm hoping that this gives you some ideas of what to talk about in your visioning sessions, about, you know, not the overarching vision, because that's not what this is. This is more examples of the kind of tactics or project level, project-specific goals that might come out of whatever you discuss for the overarching vision for the community.
I think on that note, one thing that I struggle with is not having a broader, more holistic picture of what could be. And so that's why I brought up during our last work session, you know, is there an opportunity to have some kind of comprehensive plan or something, a 10-year plan, as we think about economic development? So we had a lot of energy around that when we talked about that during our work session. Obviously, we've had great conversation today. I'd just be curious, like, because what you've presented, John, it feels like over the last several years, it's been kind of piecemeal. We're doing little things, which I think is incredible, and that is what we have capacity for. That's what we have the money for. I'm not downplaying that, but I wonder if there's an opportunity for us. I mean, especially with the major development coming with the light rail. I mean, can we zoom out a little bit and think about what a holistic kind of plan could look like over the next 10, 15 years? And then how do we prioritize? You know, because, you know, when you came with, hey, we could put this $30,000 sign on 36 and 100, I love that idea. But also there's 1,000 other things, you know, and Forrest brought that up of, well, should we give that money to something else, streetscape something, and so I love the conversation we're having. I just wonder if there's an opportunity or a way for us to have some kind of broader, bigger plan. And maybe now's not the time. You know, maybe we do continue to keep doing what we've been doing, adding a little bit each year. I don't think that's wrong, but I wonder if now is an appropriate time for us to think a little bit bigger picture.
Do you mean like set a vision and then have that as the goal and we
I mean,
points along the way?
I don't know. I think the vision stuff will certainly inform something like this, but as we think about the EDA as an entity or as a board, how do we start to think a little bit bigger picture, informed by the council's, you know, vision and strategic priorities, whatever. But I just think about, you know, the parks plan, which I'm not saying we need to replicate that by any means, but we have a framework of the types of things that could be done at our parks, and we can say yes or no when the time comes to invest in those things. I don't have that bigger picture. It's a much larger picture because this is the whole city. And so how do I start to think about the opportunities we have, how to prioritize some of those things? And maybe what we've been doing the last few years is I don't want to say the best we can do because I think it's good, but like maybe this is just what it is, because the environment is changing and new properties are coming, and we don't have the luxury of having a long-term plan. But again, I'm just posing the question: is there an opportunity for us to explore something like that? Jim?
I think some of the challenges we face when we look at some of these bigger scale plans, as we're dealing with private property, whether it be commercial or residential, and at the end of the day, there's only so much we can do in terms of spinning a plan or a big development. For example, this little development here is enough owners to where it could be a no-go. There's just not that much available land that's not city-owned. And to do something that's city-owned, then all of a sudden we're taking on a completely different character than what we've done in the past here. So it's difficult.
Any other comments or questions on the 2024 work plan? Okay, I think we do need to approve that. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, and I think, based on the discussion, the one change, explicit change that needs to be made is the facade program. No more than 50% of the project may be windows, doors, or accessibility improvements. So that needs to be in the motion.
Does someone want to make that motion? Tracy?
I will make a motion to approve the 2024 EDA work plan with the following changes of capping the windows, doors, or accessibility at 50%.
Is there a second? John?
I second that motion.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. All right, that motion passes.
Okay.
Okay, we've discussed the considerations for 25-26 work plan. I think that'll be an ongoing conversation. Anything else we want to talk about there?
No, sir.
Okay. Property status update?
We talked about 4741 Welcome. That was one of the ones I was going to mention. Wells Fargo is still on track to move into their new location by June. And then once they have vacated the current building, we presume they'll want to ramp up their marketing efforts. And very likely it's going to be a redevelopment site. So that's potentially very good news. You all know about Dunkin' already, taking the old Dairy Queen. They are, I don't know if they're working right now, but they're making some progress. And I guess that's about it. I think we've covered everything else.
Any questions? All right, any other business? All right, with that, is there a motion to adjourn? John?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second
All
it.
right, Therese.
Yay.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. The meeting is adjourned.